So students who are here studying security studies or studying development, and why should they learn about international economics? The answer seems somewhat, it might be a simple answer, but really tell our audience why they should take your class or a class like it at their schools.
Well, you took the class. Why should you take it?
I took it because it was going to be a challenge, and I knew very little about international economics.
And what did you learn?
I learned all the ways to understand what you've said so far. So I've learned about exchange rates and financial crises and how to, what happens, what kind of causes them to happen, and how to deal with them. But I'm worried that I'm forgetting things already. So this is a good refresher for the class.
So I guess the answer is one, that you should take the course, and then you should interview the professor 4 or 5 months later.
Every few months.
Every few months, right. Well, economics is certainly central to a lot of international relations issues. Mm-hmm. And one of the advantages of Fletcher is that you can come here and learn economics, but you can also learn law, and you can learn politics, and you can learn security studies, and you can learn issues of development economics and issues of environmental issues and so on. So, to be an international affairs professional, I think you really have to be multifaceted, or it's really to your advantage to be multifaceted. Mm-hmm. And it certainly leaves more options open for you as you progress through your career to have that kind of a background. I think we do a very good job of that. The courses that are taught here are rigorous. They're also policy oriented, mm-hmm. but they're not, let's look at the newspaper today and think about what they're saying. It's, here's a framework for understanding things. Now we can relate that to what's in the newspaper today, but also what happened a decade ago or 30 years ago. So you have a broader context for understanding things as well. So I think we actually do a very good job of providing an education that prepares people for careers in international affairs. And the world is changing, and to some extent frameworks change. Mm-hmm. Like the seminar that I taught this spring is about the financial crisis, and part of that is the way in which we have to think differently about macroeconomics and bring the financial side in, and the way that financial issues affect macroeconomic performance, mm-hmm. but also how macroeconomic performance affects financial issues. So this is a really exciting area of macroeconomics, and it's an example of how frameworks adjust. Nevertheless, sort of the deep base framework is something that you really need and that you can learn in courses here, mm-hmm. and it'll serve you well as new things arise. You still have sort of a framework to draw on.
Okay, so the crisis, that happened in the U.S. and around the world was one of the reasons that I wanted to take the class, because I felt that I didn't really have the tools and the language to understand what was going on. And you talk about this change that's going on, and my question is, do you feel that change is pervaded throughout the society? Are people, generally speaking, engaging these issues a lot more since the crisis? And they're definitely doing that a lot more since the crisis. I'm wondering, do you see that kind of petering out, or do you think this is going to kind of, is this engagement with economic issues, this understanding that they're important and they affect people's lives, is that here to stay?
Well, I remember when I started out as a professor, which is quite a long time ago.
I won't tell you, I won't ask you the year, so.
Okay.
Just, be nice.
1987. And what struck me was that there was very little sort of public engagement of top economists.
Okay.
That people didn't write newspaper columns. And, I sort of wondered why that was. Mm-hmm. But increasingly, over the 90s and into the 2000s, you see people like, Paul Krugman is the most obvious example. But also, after he got out of government, Larry Summers, mm-hmm. or Jeff Sachs, or a huge host of other people. There's much more engagement. Part of that might have to do with the fact that there are many more outlets now.
Sure.
And there's online outlets. There aren't more print outlets necessarily, but there are more online outlets. There are more broadcast outlets and so on. But I think part of it also is people sort of recognizing the importance of economics. And it wasn't just a feature of the crisis. The crisis certainly heightened that. Mm-hmm. But even before that, I saw over the course of my career how there was much more engagement with economics. And there are many more really top-notch economists in the public sphere. So I think that's a very healthy thing because it helps inform the citizenry. And you don't get everybody agreeing with each other. What's interesting though is there's a lot more agreement in economics among economists than you would be led to believe by very casual sort of perusal of media, especially when you get people who are non-economists who are basically partisans. So there is a fair amount of agreement among economists about a lot of things. There's disagreement as well, but you know, good economic policy is good economic policy to a certain extent. There are political issues as well. How big should government be? But you know, there is a relatively high amount of agreement. Now, sometimes it's hard to see that because what would happen on a broadcast outlet is they'll go to 100 people, and 99 will say they favor one position, one will say they favor the other. Well, they'll get that one person and one of the other 99, and to a casual observer, it looks like, you know, these are equally weighted. So, you know, that's somewhat unfortunate, I think, because it doesn't really give a sense of the amount of agreement that there might be. You know, things are often set up for broadcast reasons to be like, you know, this versus that, and in fact one side might be much more predominant than another. But nonetheless, there is a lot more engagement with economics in the public sphere these days.
So related to that, you know, people like Paul Krugman have certainly elevated the debate. Is there a sense amongst economists, you know, who are at universities and that the debate that's kind of taking place in the mainstream media, that there needs to be a lot more engagement by, you know, by people like you in those spheres? You see economists and academics kind of making an effort to kind of get out of the ivory tower.
Well, there are people who are doing it. I'm not sure that, you know, we need a lot more people doing it. But there are very good people who are doing it. People on, you know, both the right and the left. People like, you know, Marty Feldstein or Greg Mankiw, who are more on the right. People like Krugman, obviously, or Christy Romer, who are more on the left. And so, you know, there's a fair amount of good debate already going on. I don't know that we need to raise it yet higher still, but it does strike me that it's a much higher level now than, you know, than I recall when in the late 80s, early 90s, when I first started out as a professor.
And coming back to Fletcher, so one of the things you mentioned over and over again to your students was take econometrics. And I'm taking econometrics right now, and it's very challenging. And I wanted to.
Are you enjoying it?
I'm enjoying it. I'm a very visual person, so it's kind of, I haven't taken a lot of quantitative classes, so it's nice to get a lot of data and look at it. So I'm coming off as a nerd as well. So, but I wanted to ask, you know, aside from econometrics, what advice would you give to students at Fletcher, other students studying international policy? You know, what should they get out of their educational experiences before they go into the working world?
Rather than give advice about a particular course, I would think that I would advise people, as you're learning things, try to relate what you're learning to what you're reading in the newspaper or in magazines, or, you know, you see as events around you. And try to make those connections, because sometimes there could be a tendency for people to learn the material for the test, but not to go that extra step. So I think one thing that we do well at Fletcher is we kind of hold your hand to take you along to that extra step and say, you know, here's what you're learning, here's why it's relevant. But the more you can make those connections, it both helps you to learn the material, because it's like exercising your knowledge, but also that's exactly what you ultimately want to do with it. You don't want to learn things just to pass the test. You want to learn things because they offer you a framework. And the more you do that, the better you become at it. So it's not so much that there are certain courses that I think you should take, although, you know, econometrics, because it's not just about running regression analysis. It's really thinking more deeply about what can you learn from data and what can't you learn from data, and, you know, what might be wrong with arguments based on particular statistics, or what might be correct about it. So that's a very powerful set of tools. But more broadly, you know, always try to sort of think about what you're learning in relation to how it helps you understand the world, and make that sort of a standard part of the way you approach your education in economics.